effectively. Now, as we know, the brain is enormously complex, but we can simplify its operation into two fundamentally different modes. The first is what I'll call the focused mode. And the focused mode is just like it sounds like. You turn your attention to something and boom, it's on. But the second mode is a little different. It's a relaxed set of neural states that I'll call the diffuse mode. It's a number of resting states. And so it seems that when you're learning, you're going back and forth between these two different modes. Now, how can we better understand these modes? Through analogy. And what we're going to use is a pinball machine analogy. And you all know how pinballs work. You just pull back on the plunger and the ball goes boinking out and bounces around on the rubber bumpers, and that's how you get points. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this pinball and we're going to put it right on your brain, right? So there it is. There's the pinball machine on your brain. And if you look, this is the analogy for the focused mode. And when you're learning, you're often thinking tightly as you're focusing on something. It involves thoughts you're somewhat familiar with, perhaps historical patterns, or you're familiar with the multiplication table. So you think a thought and it takes off and moves along smoothly, pretty much along the pathways that you've already laid. But what if the thought you're thinking is actually a new thought, a new concept, a new technique that you've never thought of before? Well, that's symbolized by this new pattern towards the bottom of the pinball machine metaphor. To get to this new place, I mean, at least sort of metaphorically speaking, look at all the rubber bumpers that are in the way. How can you even get there? You need a different way of thinking, a new perspective in a sense, and that's provided here by the diffuse mode. Look at how far apart those rubber bumpers are from one another. When you think a thought, it takes off and it can range very widely as you're attempting to come up with some new ideas. So you can't do the careful focused thinking that you can in the focus mode, but you can at least get to the place you need to be in to grapple with these new ideas. So the bottom line for all of us out of this is this. When you're learning, you want to go back and forth between these modes. And if you find yourself, as you're focusing in on something, trying to learn a new concept or solve a problem, and you get stuck, you want to turn your attention away from that problem and allow the diffuse modes, those resting states, to do their work in the background. Now, how can we actually use these ideas in real life? If you look at this guy right here, he was Salvador Dali, one of the most brilliant surrealist painters of the 20th century. Dali was the very definition of a wild and crazy guy. You can see him there. He's got his pet ocelot, Babu. And what Dali used to do when he was kind of stuck as he was solving some problem related to his painting was he'd sit down and he'd relax in a chair and he'd have keys in his hands. And he'd hold those keys and he'd relax and kind of let his brain noodling away. And just as he'd relax so much that he'd fall asleep, the keys would fall from his hands, the clatter would wake him up, and off he'd go. He'd take those ideas from the diffuse mode over to the focused mode, where he could work with them, refine them, and use them for his painting. So you might think, well, that's great. You know, that's good for an artist. But I'm an engineer, so how can I use these ideas? Well, if you see this guy right here,